Welcome to Straight Talk, Joe Kent. Nice to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Tell us what the pivotal moment was that convinced you to run against another Republican, Congresswoman Herrera Beutler, the incumbent, in the primary.
Yeah, so really it was the aftermath of the 2020 election. I had major issues with the way the election was handled. I felt there was a good deal of evidence of fraud. So when Jaime Herrera Beutler voted to certify the election of 2020, I had major reservations. And then when she voted for the impeachment of President Trump after the riot on January 6th, I realized that she was not capable of defending our district and really our nation against the onslaught of what the radical left is doing to our country right now. And so I didn't see any other Republicans stepping forward to go and challenge her. I had never intended on running for office before, but I fought for this country for 20 years, lost many friends, lost my late wife in this fight, worked heavily on the Trump 2020 campaign, so I believed in the America First agenda. And so I looked around and I said, well, if I don't go do this, then I feel like no one else will. So that's what really got me into the fight.
Well, for her part, Herrera Beutler said the former president acted against his oath of office by inciting the riot on January 6th to try to halt the peaceful transfer of power, and then for hours he failed to stop the violence, and she stands by that vote.
I hope you get a chance to talk to her, because the people in the district have hardly heard from her since the January 6th vote. So I would love to see the evidence that she has that indicates that everything that we've seen so far, especially President Trump's public statements that day, there was no incitement of violence. President Trump actually requested there to be additional forces deployed to the Capitol to deal with the potential for violence on January 6th, because there was intelligence. The federal government did have an understanding that there could be violence on January 6th, yet no preventative measures were taken leading up to the January 6th riot taking place. The perimeter of the Capitol wasn't hardened whatsoever, even after the pipe bombs were discovered. So right now we have a lack of information. We know exactly what President Trump and everyone in his administration was doing before the riot, after the riot, during the riot. We don't know what the intelligence was leading up to January 6th. We don't know what the authorities were doing. We don't know what the Capitol Police, the Sergeant at Arms, and a bunch of other federal agencies were doing. So that's what remains to be seen. That's what needs to still come to light.
Well, there have been a lot of committee hearings, as you know, this summer, 18 at least live witnesses, scores of videotaped depositions, documentary evidence. The January 6th committee hearings have indicated Donald Trump did set the nation on a path to violence that day. He watched on TV and did nothing for 187 minutes, more than 3 hours, to call off the mob attacking the Capitol. Did he do enough to stop the violence that was happening at the Capitol?
Absolutely. President Trump requested additional forces be deployed to the Capitol that day. And as the events were taking place, it's very unreasonable. I spent a lot of time in high-risk combat-like situations. It's ridiculous to think that a commanding officer, a general who's not directly on the scene, can start directing traffic somehow. That's up to the tactical commanders on the ground. And Trump had done what a responsible leader is supposed to do. He gave them the resources that they needed on that day. He said that they should have had even more resources on that day. So the blame for what happened on January 6th isn't with the commander in chief. What the January 6th partisan witch hunt committee is doing right now is they're just trying to make it so that President Trump can't run for re-election. They're also trying to take out people that are part of the America First movement, that are organizing folks at the grassroots level, such as Steve Bannon. So really, this is just a partisan witch hunt. And I think every American should be really alarmed at the way that our national security state has been weaponized against one political party. We've seen this since January 6th, the way that many have been detained after January 6th, deprived of their constitutional rights. And now we're even seeing parents who show up to school board meetings. They're being targeted by the FBI Counterterrorism Center. I worked in the intelligence community. We actually need patriots that are going to defend our country, but we can't have our intelligence services and our law enforcement services turned into a Praetorian Guard.
Don't you think the president should have stopped the violence sooner? I mean, waiting 187 minutes to address the nation, and then he had a wink and a nod at those that were storming the Capitol by saying, "I love you, I think you're special," indicating that he supported what they were doing. Is that really what the commander-in-chief should have done? Is that putting America first when the Capitol is being stormed, violence is happening, lawmakers, staffers' lives are being put at risk, people were hurt, some were killed?
Well, the premise there is that President Trump could have somehow gotten on Twitter or done something that would have stopped a riot in place. So I reject that entire premise. President Trump was allowing commanders on the ground to make decisions. This is far below his level. And then when everything had cleared, President Trump did put out a statement, and he said, hey, I hope everybody goes home. So none of this is on President Trump. The fact that the perimeter wasn't hardened is a major issue. Another major issue is what happened with the election of 2020. Why were all those people in Washington, D.C.? Why can't we have very basic questions answered, not just about the election of 2020?
Do you think that President Biden won the election?
No, I don't. I believe it was rigged and stolen. I'm happy with. I feel fine saying that, and I want to be able to lay out all the evidence of fraud in a venue, and we're going to use the floor of Congress to do that in January of 2023.
Well, there's already been
we're going to lay out every single.
Well, Joe, there's already been a multitude of evidence that the election was legitimate, from the courts to even former President Trump's own administration, including Attorney General William Barr, his Homeland Security Department. All have said there is no evidence there was election fraud that would have changed the results, that it was the most secure election in U.S. history. What evidence do you have that it wasn't, and why would you want to go through all that again when it's already been through the courts and decided?
We have plenty of evidence about level fraud. The problem is none of it has ever been given a venue for adjudication. All of the courts that have refused to hear the cases, they haven't let us actually lay out the evidence. The administration officials who are saying that this was a fair and free election, they have refused to go back and actually do their job because they're absolute cowards. What we need to do is we need to just lay out every bit of evidence of fraud or discrepancies, talking about national change of voter address databases. In Georgia, all the consent decrees that were violated in Pennsylvania, the courts are on our side on that one. Wisconsin's moving to decertification because of the fraud rate with permanently confined folks. The full forensic audit down in Maricopa County, Arizona, with the ballots that were out of chain of custody, and not to mention the fact that no one down there in Arizona had the administrative password
Joe, let
to
me
the
jump in
tabulation
here.
machines.
Let's move on. We don't have a lot of time, so I want to move on to another question, and we can talk more about the vote later. But there have been some questions raised by your opponents about your association with white nationalist figure Nick Fuentes, and they said you had a conversation with him about working together and him helping you with your social media strategy and getting more followers. Is that true?
That's just an attack by my opponent. So when I first announced I was going to run for Congress, I had a wide range of consultants that reached out to me and offered their services. I did speak with Nick once. He talked about doing things with social media, and I just assumed that he was another consultant. I had no idea who Fuentes was or any of the controversy around him. So that's the extent of our association. I know one of my opponents, attempted to link us together, and then since then Fuentes has been attacking me. His goon squad even shows up to many of my events to say that I'm not enough of a white nationalist or something like that. And I'm not a white nationalist at all. I'm an America First candidate. I'm fighting for every single American of every race, every single creed. If you're an American citizen, our movement is about embracing you and about fighting for you.
Well, he did say that you had told him that you love what he is doing, and it sounds like you're disavowing that. But now this week, there's a New York Times report, as you mentioned, citing the Southern Poverty Law Center, that Fuentes has turned on you, and he now says you are a deep state denizen yourself. And I've seen bumper stickers around Vancouver that say Joe Kent is CIA, and you were once a CIA employee, and they point people to a website that says you are an agent of the deep state. Are you?
This is how credible these internet types are. I mean, they think I'm part of some conspiracy to, I don't know, subvert Washington State. I don't know what the full extent of it is, but no, I worked in the CIA as a paramilitary operations officer for a year after I retired from the military. I intended on making that my second career. I've been very upfront about my service there. But yeah, as far as this being part of some great deep state plot, sorry to disappoint all the QAnon Fuentes fans.
Do you know who's behind that website?
I don't. I mean, really, I'm getting a good deal of flack because I'm in the lead in all of the independent polling. So I get flack from the right-wing establishment. I get flack from the far left. And I think that there's a group there that has a decent amount of funding and a decent amount of traction on the internet with the Nick Fuentes wing that wants to see me go away as well. But really, they're only supporting the Republican establishment by going after America First candidates. It shows who they answer to, which apparently is the Republican establishment.
Your conservative opponent, who we will hear from later, Heidi St. said you're not a true conservative. You were a registered Democrat in Multnomah County in 2020, and you voted, as you have said, for Bernie Sanders in the primary. Is that true? And if so, why?
Yeah, I voted for Bernie Sanders in the 2020 primary. After my late wife was killed, I moved back to Portland briefly. I grew up in Portland, left in '98, but I moved back briefly to get my kids closer to my family. But I was already working on the Trump 2020 campaign, and there was no Republican primary in 2020. So my goal was to get the Democrat that could not win in a general election into the general election, and that was Bernie Sanders. I don't think the Democrats could have stolen enough ballots to get Bernie Sanders across the finish line. So I registered as a Democrat and voted for Bernie in the general in the primary in 2020, and then in the general, I voted for President Trump.
Well, St. John calls that excuse disingenuous, trying to cause a little bit of chaos in the election. She asks, if you are a true conservative, shouldn't you be true to your roots and have a record of conservatism? She calls you an opportunist.
Yeah, as far as that, as long as I've been in the public light, which I understand hasn't been very long. I was in the military prior to that, but I've been speaking out on behalf of President Trump's America First foreign policy long before I ever ran for office. So all of 2020, I was doing everything I could to get President Trump reelected, and my so-called conservative opponents were doing absolutely nothing to get President Trump reelected in 2020, including so-called influencers like Heidi St. John. And then obviously Jaime Herrera Beutler was doing nothing to try and get President Trump reelected. She was actively working against him. So as long as I've been in the public light, I've been doing everything I can to push forward the America First agenda. Prior to that, I always voted Republican in general elections. After the Bush era, I became a Ron Paul guy. And then in 2008, when Rush Limbaugh talked about Operation Chaos, I would register occasionally as a Democrat to push forward weak Democrats. But in general elections, I would always vote Republican.
Well, if elected to represent the people of Southwest Washington's 3rd Congressional District, what would be your top priority?
The top priority when we take power back in 2023, January of 2023, we are going to stop the Biden administration dead in its tracks. We're going to do that by impeaching Joe Biden, impeaching Kamala Harris. We're going to tell the Biden administration very plainly that we will not sign off on the federal budget until they reverse all of their energy policies. The American people are being absolutely throttled right now by inflation and the price of the pump. That's all self-inflicted. Biden made that happen by killing off the Keystone XL. So now we're going to very plainly say to him, if he's going to choke the American people with the gas pump, we'll choke off funding from the federal budget. We're going to turn every committee into an oversight committee. We're going to adjudicate the election that we spoke about. We're going to hold Anthony Fauci accountable. We're going to hold the department, the DHS, the Border Patrol. We're going to hold them accountable for leaving our border wide open. We're going to go after Mayorkas. We're going to go after AG Garland for all of the encroachments on our rights that the Department of Justice is conducting right now. And we are going to kill off everything that the Biden administration wants to do until we can get Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and this corrupt regime out of power. Obstruction, impeachment, and congressional oversight is what we're doing going forward in 23 until Biden's removed.
You know, a lot of people have seen the TV ads, some of it from you, some from Jaime Herrera Beutler about Social Security. You and Congresswoman Jaime Herrera Beutler disagree on what to do about Social Security and keeping it solvent. She's accused you of wanting to cut benefits. What is your proposal?
So with Jaime Herrera Beutler's current plan, Social Security will more than likely go insolvent within the next 7 to 8 years, and that will be a 25% pay cut for everyone on Social Security right now. So to preserve Social Security, what I want to do is I want to start seizing assets from the Chinese Communist Party here in America. China owes us reparations for COVID. We can use those funds to make Social Security solvent once again. We also have to cut off access to Social Security for illegal immigrants. Jaime Herrera Beutler refuses to sign on to legislation that would prevent illegal immigrants from accessing our Social Security system. Jaime has also voted for amnesty for illegal immigrants every time it's been on the docket, to include most recently about a week ago with the National Defense Authorization Act. So Jaime's plan will have us give Social Security a 25% cut. I don't want to touch anyone's benefits that are on Social Security right now or approaching retirement age. I also think for people that are my age or younger, I'm 42, we have to realize and recognize that the social contract that our parents have, Social Security, it's not going to exist for us. So we have to start coming up with solutions. A privatized, high-interest, tax-free savings plan that's managed on the private sector on Wall Street, like a 401k plan, is a much better option for a blended option for Social Security.
What age would you raise the retirement age to, and at what point would that kick in for what age group now?
I think this is something we have to have a national discussion about, but this pertains to people that are my age and younger. So Gen X, the millennials, and Gen Z, we have to realize that there's an inverted curve, right, or inverted pyramid right now, where you have all the baby boomers retiring, and this system's simply not going to exist for us. The system's also based on people having a much shorter life expectancy than we have right now. So I think we have to have a national conversation about it. I think we look at something like closer to the 70s as opposed to what it is right now. But I don't have a hard number for that. But I think that is something that we definitely have to discuss. And I think having a blended plan where we're not 100% reliant on government Social Security, where people have an option of investing in the private sector, I think that's going to give us a lot more flexibility for the younger generations. But just to be perfectly clear, if you're on Social Security right now, or you're approaching Social Security age, I do not want to touch your plan. You are owed that money. You bought into the system. It's the younger generations. We're going to have to figure something else out.
This is top of mind for a lot of people right now. Do you support the Supreme Court decision that overturned Roe v. Wade, a woman's right to have an abortion?
Yes, I 100% support Roe versus Wade being overturned. I would move to have a national ban on abortions. I believe life begins at conception. I think we have to have a pro-life culture in our country that takes care of women who are pregnant, who might not necessarily want the baby, that takes care of the women throughout the pregnancy, and then takes care of the child, revamping how adoptions are handled. I think we have a great opportunity right now to really lead the way globally and become a truly pro-life country that takes care of life from conception, until a child becomes a young adult.
The state of Washington has laws that protect a right to an abortion. Would you want to see those overturned in Washington state?
Yes, I would. Yeah, life begins at conception, and I think that the federal government should outlaw it in all the states. I don't think states should be able to sanction killing the unborn. For right now, the way it is, with it being a states' rights issue, that's a good temporary victory. So what I would do from the congressional perspective is I would ensure that not one penny of federal money goes to funding abortions whatsoever. This is why I'm so critical of Jaime Herrera Beutler. Jaime Herrera Beutler, while claiming that she's pro-life, has given $1.5 billion to Planned Parenthood, the #1 killer of the unborn, and then also the folks that are pushing the comprehensive groomer sex education on our children in our schools.
Joe Kent, we're running out of time, but I wanted to give you about 30 seconds for a final thought that you'd like to leave with voters before the primary.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a choice to make. I never thought that I would get into politics. I spent my life fighting for this country over 20 years in special operations. And right now, our country's being taken over, and we cannot be defended by Republicans like Jaime Herrera Beutler. I am the only Republican who has the endorsement of President Trump. I'm the only Republican who has a pathway to victory. That's why the establishment and so many other forces are coming after me right now. So I'd encourage people to do their own homework. Come to one of my events. I'm doing rallies and town halls every night of the week between now and the election. Go to joekentforcongress.com to find those. Also, my number is in the voters pamphlet. If you call, I will answer. Thank you very much, and God bless.
And one final quick question. Do you think that Donald Trump will come campaign for you if you make it into the top 2 going into the general election?
Well, he just did a telephonic town hall for us last night. President Trump is a great supporter of mine. I really appreciate his support. So hopefully we can get him out here for a rally. I think that's definitely a potential.
Joe Kent, thank you for joining us here on Straight Talk.
Thank you very much.